So, I'm Jennifer Long, and I will be interviewing Mr. Christopher Collins today. Mr. Collins, do you mind if I ask you some questions about your process in creating lesson plans?
Not at all.
Great. How much time do you estimate you spend on lesson planning every week?
Um, Given that we have time after school and in the morning, maybe 6 hours per week.
Wow, okay. How long before the lesson do you have to plan it?
Well, most of the information is provided through the long-term lesson plan, so I don't spend too much time thinking about what I'm going to actually put into it. So maybe an hour or so, depending on what subject and what we're doing that week.
Okay. Does your school require a specific lesson planning template?
Not that I know of. They kind of give us free range to do as we please as long as we accomplish the objectives.
Do you write a lesson plan for every lesson that you teach?
No, I don't. Some I tend to know more things about than others, and for those I can go off of my knowledge after reading and refreshing up on what else it covers.
Does your school require lesson plans to be submitted to administrators or shared with parents?
They are to be submitted with administration. Um, Sharing with parents, I think, is a part of the process so that they know what's going to be taught for that week, so they can probably help the children to get a jump on what's ahead.
Mm. How closely do you follow your lesson plans?
It depends on the children's reaction to the beginning of the class. If they tend to understand what I'm saying, then I will follow the lesson plan. If not, then I will change it to see if I can make it a little easier for them to grasp the concepts.
Okay. Do you ever have to change the lesson plan while you're teaching?
Yes, on a lot of occasions I've had to, having not in essence overestimated my students, but overestimating my own teaching ability as far as giving them information in a way that they can understand without being too complicated. So yes.
Yeah, I think that's especially difficult in an ESL school.
Yes, definitely.
Do you find lesson plans helpful or tedious?
I do find them helpful. Sometimes I feel like they're a formality that the school wants you to have something on paper, and I feel like sometimes it can take away from other areas that you might want to concentrate on. Instead of spending that time doing lesson plan, you could be doing something towards creating activities that will help the children more with hands-on.
Okay. If you were given more prep time, do you think you would spend longer developing your lesson plans?
For me, no. I would rather do other activities with the kids instead of sticking to what's on their paper. It's like I say, some teaching is about improvising. A lot of times kids kids don't really understand what's given to them right then and there, and you have to improvise in order to reach them.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't always follow that piece of paper that you have, because then you're just stuck in this constraint, this little box. And teaching's not about a box.
I agree with you. Do you enjoy lesson planning, or would you rather teach from pre-made lesson plans?
I would rather it be my lesson planning than a pre-made one. A pre-made would help as far as template-wise goes, with looking at it and seeing how you would set it up and things you might do differently. But I would rather make my own, because I know what I want to do and I know what I can do to best help the kids.
I agree. Are you highly conscious of time in your lesson plans?
As far as like executing lesson plan, not at all.
Mm-hmm.
Which is probably a bad thing. It's one of those things where if I feel like a child is needing more emphasis on a specific part, I will stay on that part for as long as it takes. And if I feel like they've grasped other things, then I will move a little faster through. So no, I'm not really worried about the time.
How do you incorporate differentiated instruction into your lesson plans? I feel like this issue is especially important at our school, being that we teach kids from fluent English speakers all the way to very beginner level.
A lot of times you can get the higher kids to help the lower kids. So if you have things that are overbranching, you can go into more specific areas as you go along. So the general idea is this, and then it might be a very simple level where the smaller the less advanced kids get it, but you know that your advanced kids will get it. Then you can move up gradually throughout your lesson. And so you can still give chances for the higher kids to help out the younger kids by making, I guess, stair stepping it up as you go throughout, advancing information, giving them harder things like that.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent strategy. How do you choose assessments for your lessons? And don't just think that I mean tests by assessments, just like checking the learning as you teach, checking comprehension as you teach.
For me, especially teaching in ASL school, it's all about speaking. So getting the kids to speak, to try to not only just regurgitate what you've taught them, but try to comprehend to some extent as to what they're being taught. So most of my assessments, I would like for one of my assessments to be more verbal, so I could actually know, because if they're writing it down, for instance, with the TOEIC that they take here, it's all about regurgitating information. I studied this book for 5 hours. I can regurgitate this, but I don't understand it.
Right.
So it's all about having them verbally give me a response to a question that requires critical thinking. So verbal assessments are what I would love, or what I do love, and what I would love to do more of.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Mr. Collins. Here is a second interview I did with a teacher named Mr. Nis. He has about 7 years experience in the teaching field, and he answered a lot of my questions really well. Here it is. Okay, so my name is Jennifer Long, and I will be interviewing Hanan Nis to find out a little bit about his lesson planning procedures. So, Mr. Nis, do you mind if I ask you some questions about your process in creating lesson plans?
No, absolutely not.
How much time do you estimate that you spend on lesson planning every week?
I would say that I spend about 3 to 4 hours each week.
Okay. And how long before the lesson do you have to plan it?
Generally, I have the day before the lesson, but I usually plan a week ahead. So I'm normally about a week ahead on my lesson planning.
Okay. Does your school require a specific lesson planning template?
There's no specific lesson planning template. We're broken down into 6th grade, so we each have our own one that we decide to use.
Do you write a lesson plan for every lesson that you teach?
I do not. I teach a club class, which is like sports club. I do not write a lesson plan for that.
Does your school require lesson plans to be submitted to administrators or shared with parents?
I don't think so. I don't believe that they send it to anybody.
How closely do you follow your lesson plans?
I use it more as a guideline, but with every lesson plan you have to be able to adapt to see how the children react to the lesson. And especially since I repeat some lessons, I learn from one class and take out and add in what needs to be added or taken out.
Okay. Do you ever have to change the lesson plan while you're teaching?
Well, as I said, sometimes you have to change a lesson plan. Maybe you overestimated something. Maybe you said that it'll take this much time and it took longer, or maybe you have less time so you can add stuff in. So again, every lesson plan has to be adaptable, be able to have some change.
I fully agree. Do you find lesson plans helpful or tedious?
I think lesson plans are good in the sense that it can have a guideline, but I do find it tedious if you have to write down exactly like a step-by-step process. I think it's more helpful to write down a general idea, like say I'm doing this science experiment, but you don't need to write out the steps of the science experiment. Or you could say that I'm going to be teaching soccer, not necessarily say the steps, but just the general guidelines to always refresh your memory and stuff, especially if you're planning for weeks ahead. It's always good to like just get a quick glance, almost like flashcards.
Yeah, I agree. If you were given more prep time, do you think you would spend longer on developing your lesson plans?
I don't think I would spend longer developing my lesson plans, but I would maybe add more aids to enhance a lesson, maybe to allow for more differentiated learning or for allow different learning types, and maybe just add more elements to the lesson so that it can be the best possible.
Okay. Do you enjoy lesson planning, or would you rather teach from pre-made lesson plans?
I wouldn't say I enjoy lesson planning, but I would not want to teach from pre-made lesson plans. I like having individuality and being able to create my own lessons and customize them. I feel like pre-made learning does not allow students to flourish, especially if you get to know the students, you get to know what works for your class and doesn't work for your class. So it always has to be that ability to always create your own, and maybe some lessons are going to be more fun, some are not going to be more fun, but definitely not pre-made. But I don't say I enjoy creating lesson plans.
Yeah, I agree. Are you highly conscious of time in your lesson plans?
I think starting out when I was writing lesson plans, I was more conscious of times, trying to stick to more, say like introductions would be 2 minutes, this many minutes and stuff like that. But I find that you don't teach well when you're trying to stick to the schedule. Now with more experience and being in the classroom and interacting with the kids, I think that I have my general idea and I just flow and go with the flow and how the kids react. So I generally like to start my classes out with a discussion. Sometimes that's a minute, sometimes that's 2 minutes, sometimes it's 5 minutes. Depends where the discussion goes or what the topic is. So I wouldn't say I have fixed schedule of times, but I generally get. I've had experience now, so I generally get all the stuff done that I need to get done.
I feel like it becomes almost innate.
Yeah.
You start to realize how time is flowing.
Yeah.
How do you incorporate differentiated instruction into your lesson plans?
So I like to base my lessons with as many aids as possible, because some people are visual learners, some people are auditory learners, some people are tactile learners. So I generally have all three elements at some point in my lesson so that people can adjust to the learning styles that they like the most. As well, I think I'm very highly approachable, and the students know that, so they're able to talk to me. And it's just as many materials and stuff that you can do, or have different ways of teaching a thing. So not one way is going to work with everybody. So for example, when I'm handing out worksheets, I normally have like a tactile piece of paper that I can give them, but it's also on the screen as well. So maybe some people like the technology better and they could type on the computer if they needed, or if they needed hand paper or anything like that.
What about situations like at our school, how some students speak very low amounts of English and some students are almost fluent? How do you account for that?
Yeah, so my general rule is I always teach to the lowest level of the student. So I would start at the lowest, and then I have other work that the higher students can do, or I have other sheets, or if I would say that, like, I wouldn't tell the students directly this, but I would know like maybe the student is a little bit more advanced, so I would say like, oh, you have to give me like 10 to 15 sentences, and somebody else has to give me 10 sentences, or where I focus maybe my time when I'm walking around the students, maybe I'll spend a little bit more time with one student that needs more help than the other students, or something like that. So
okay. And my last question is, how do you choose assessments for your lessons? Now, assessment can mean anything, even not just testing, just checking student knowledge as you teach.
So my general assessment, a lot of my general assessment comes from anecdotal notes. So I like to observe my students quite a lot, and I ask questions within the class. And although my students are required to raise their hand to answer, I generally take note of who I'm picking, so I get all students to answer. So a lot of that comes with the anecdotal assessments, as well as you have the formal assessments within the projects and the tests and stuff like that. But I would say a big chunk of my grade, or my opinion as well as even, comes with my anecdotal notes, with how I observe them reacting to different questions and stuff like that.
Perfect. Thank you for taking the time to help me with this today,
No
Mr.
worries.
So after reviewing both the interviews with Mr. Collins and Mr. Nis, I've realized they have a similar teaching style. They don't always spend a lot of time on lesson planning, but they do recognize that it is a crucial part of teaching. When I asked the question, would you rather have lessons provided for you, both of them were very against that. I think they want to maintain creative control over their classrooms. Neither of them is very conscious of time management when teaching their lessons, which is fine in a school like ours that has a fairly open curriculum. So falling behind isn't really an issue, but it might be more of a problem for them when they go back to North America to teach. As to differentiation, I have had the pleasure of watching both of them teach, and Mr. Nis tends to teach to the lows. He simplifies his lessons so that even the student with barely any English comprehension will be able to follow the lesson. And then he just provides extra activities for the higher fluency level students. Whereas Mr. Collins tends to challenge all of his students with high expectations. So I tend to favor Mr. Collins' approach. I know there are students that start to fall behind, but I offer extra tutoring after class for those kids. Just because they are the minority in the classroom, most of our students are fairly fluent in English. As to my own reflections about this activity, I personally spend quite a lot of time lesson planning, and I consider it absolutely crucial to the teaching process. Even if it's just a short lesson, I might just jot down a few notes on a post-it, and I might not even bring that post-it to class, but it's enough for me to set my activities in order, create a more logical scheme for how I'm going to deliver the content during my class. I found this activity very useful, actually, being able to compare my own habits to other teachers. I have noticed that I spend more time than the average teacher lesson planning, but I'm trying to incorporate a lot more game-based learning since I have younger kids this year. So I've found that looking for resources online is fairly time-consuming, but I'm building quite a, I guess, toolkit, you could call it, of activities that I'll be able to use throughout my career. So it's a lot of work now, but I feel like it will pay off in the end. Thank you for listening.